So if you watched Petit Le Mans, you understand now why I love this event so much. It never disappoints. In the last 2 hours and 45 minutes, which is a typical IMSA sports car sprint race, the amount of drama and the amount of things that we have to talk about in this video, we almost could go for 10 hours, which is the length of this video, but we're going to try to do it in about 10 to 15 minutes. Wow. Okay, where do we start? We'll start with the big beef, the big drama, and quite frankly, the most shocking moment of the entire race. The 02 Ganassi car in the hands of Earl Bamber was absolutely dominant when he was in the car. Fastest lap of the race by far. Could pass at ease, could pull away at ease. But as the temperature dropped, and I've talked about this a few times in my Rolex coverage, you see that the turbocharged cars, which the Acura of Wayne Taylor and Meyer Shank Racing tends to come to the front and challenge the normally aspirated cars. So the Acuras began to challenge. The Acuras began to lead. Desperation set in, and Earl Bamber ran into the 01 Ganassi car. They both crashed going into turn one and ruined both of their days. Chip Ganassi Racing pulling an Andretti Autosport Mid-Ohio right in front of our eyes, and really it's worse because both cars ended up in the wall, and both cars, well, at least one of the cars, had a legitimate shot of winning this race. It's hilarious. And that was Jimmy Johnson just absolutely flying by on a scooter. So I guess I should give a shout out to Jimmy Johnson because of that crash. He gets on the podium at Petit Le Mans, which may or may not be his final IMSA sports car race, though it's starting to sound like he's going to do Le Mans in the Garage 56 NASCAR entry. Let's talk about the winners and some cars that appeared to win and ultimately didn't win. Meyer Shank Racing. Now, as it turned out, the final battle in the last 2 hours of this race was not only for the Petit Le Mans, but it was for the outright IMSA Sports Car Championship. It was between the Acuras of Meyer Shank Racing and Wayne Taylor Racing. It looked like it was going to be one of the absolute classic finishes that you could ever expect. Two cars completely evenly matched, slicing through traffic like you wouldn't believe. But ultimately, Filipe Albuquerque made the critical mistake, and that was to pass the Windward Racing number 57 in turn 3. Those two cars made contact, and ultimately that eliminated the 10 car from this race, from the championship, and sad souls all the way through Wayne Taylor Racing. It's interesting, in that interview, a segment of the interview that I unfortunately didn't have a space for in yesterday's video, we talked to Filipe Albuquerque about his luck at Petit Le Mans and the fact that the last 4 years, and now unfortunately 5 years, he's been leading in the last hour in contention to win, and something takes him out of it. It was a fuel problem when he was driving for Cadillac. It's been accidents and obviously contact this year. So what a shame for Wayne Taylor Racing, but what a benefit it was for Meyer Shank Racing. We started our IMSA coverage this year with a Meyer Shank victory overall in the Rolex 24, and we end it this year, at least for the 2022 year. We'll talk about 2023 in a second, with a Meyer Shank victory. And I have to give credit to my cameraman Kyle, Ohio boy, shouting out Ohio boys. Yes, Meyer Shank Racing was the logical pick because they sent out the previous era of prototypes here at Petit Le Mans with a victory, and in their second victory they send out the DPIs going away into the future. And of course, it's only 2 days from now when we get to see the GTP cars debut, and that'll be, I think, quite a bit of fun. GT was, I would say, equally, if not more exciting than the prototypes. And it was also very, very strange. I can smell a rule change incoming because ultimately the GTD AM cars, the green number paneled and highlighted cars that have one quote-unquote amateur driver, one driver who isn't a professional racing driver, they actually won GT overall in a very strange turn of events with the IMSA rules. The IMSA rule or the IMSA has a wave around rule in effect, kind of similar to the rule I always complain about IndyCar using. And it's especially weird in this because with multiple classes, IMSA makes a point, probably rightly so, to not allow an overall leader to split up a class battle. So when a class leader is ahead of the overall leader but behind the pace car, they naturally wave around the class leader. And when they do that, they wave the rest of the class through. Well, what happened in this race is that the GTM cars got to get a wave around and the GT Pro cars did not. What that did is give the GTM cars a lap and a half advantage over the GT Pro cars, and the GT Pro cars never made that up and finished behind the GTM cars. Now, who won in GTM? Well, it was another great day for Acura. They won both, I guess you could say, Prototype and GT overall. It was Gradient Racing who started last in the field and ultimately won. And by the way, one of the drivers in that car I think is interesting, because if you went back to that Alex Palou laugh and make fun of the whole situation stream, I talked about a driver named Kiffin Simpson. Well, Kiffin Simpson was one of the drivers in that car. He's got connections to Ganassi. Everybody's a cousin. In GT Pro, it's very, very interesting because Risi Competizione, who we talked to, the race engineer for Risi Competizione yesterday, they were absolutely going all out. This is the last race for the Ferrari 488, the turbocharged V8. That car will be gone next year. It'll be a turbocharged V6 car next year. So Ferrari had no incentive to hold back. They were going for the win, and they got it. The only problem, one of their drivers was 11 minutes over the minimum or the maximum drive time. That got them tossed from the race. Risi Ferrari out. Enter Vassar Sullivan Lexus, the winner in GTD Pro here at Petit Le Mans. And by the way, we're standing kind of adjacent to the Andretti Autosport pit. They won in LMP3, and it was 8-star winning in LMP2. So I'm going to do a quick cut here and bring in, I like to do this when I go to other races and have other YouTubers who are covering racing. We're going to talk to GT Rain, aka Chris Aurelio, who's also here covering this event, and hear some of his thoughts on this race. All right, after a little bit of roly-poly Juan Pablo intermission, we got GT Rain, Chris Aurelio here. Chris, Petit Le Mans never disappoints, but you know, I've been to several of these races. You have too. This one, I think we're going to remember for quite a bit of years. Your impressions on this Petit Le Mans, and how does it rank for you?
Well, I mean, it's actually only my second Petit Le Mans. I've been to a handful of IMSA races, but second year in a row here at Petit Le Mans. You're right. This race really never disappoints.
No.
Somehow at the finish, it doesn't matter how the middle of the race is. I was talking to Kyle behind the camera earlier. I was saying, let's be real. The first 9 hours of this race hardly seemed like they ever matter.
Yeah.
Today was verification of that, if anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's been really tough for me to actually follow a lot of the things that happen in the race. A lot of the camera work you've actually seen, bit courtesy of me. Some of it also Kyle as well. I got to give him credit where it's due.
A little bit of credit, not too much credit.
Not a whole lot. Probably didn't hear that one. So yeah, it was hard for me to follow a lot of the race, but right when I came back, it was like watching a 1 hour sprint race.
Yep.
And so from that point on, it came to a point where really, as long as the 10 and the 60 didn't finish 5th and 6th, it was going to come down to whichever driver was in front, they were going to win the championship. Kind of funny how IMSA always ends up in positions like that at the end of the season.
That was the unbelievable thing to me, because going into this weekend, I think most people seem to want to hand the trophy to Wayne Taylor already, but you get here and Meyer Shank did absolutely everything they needed to do, despite the fact that Wayne Taylor specifically went out at the beginning of the race on tires they'd spun on in qualifying as to not lose points. Well, they're lucky that they did that. Maybe they would have lost third in the championship. But I looked at this race, and the GT division I felt like was just bonkers, to say the least.
Right.
What was your impression of the GT race? Because I know we were sitting in the media center when they came by Talladega style, 3 and 4 wide, pushing each other in the grass. Do we expect anything less of IMSA GT racing?
Well, it's even more emphasized this season. We have the mixed GT3 class, which, like you mentioned earlier today, that was really, it was showing its true colors in terms of, we had a GTD overall winner today, not a GTD Pro overall winner, a GTD AM, if you want to call it that.
And the car that started last.
Right, overall winner. And it wasn't in fashion like we've seen before at VIR, where they just had more pace. This race, it was sort of an edge case that we haven't seen yet in IMSA, but certainly an interesting one. I think the GTD, sorry. The combined,
I did that too. It's fine.
Having both those cars in the same regulation set, I think it was controversial at the beginning of the season. There were a lot of questions at Daytona. I think it's really been quite interesting, though, to see what we saw today here. And we certainly wouldn't have seen it in previous seasons with the GTEs alongside the GT3s.
Oh, no, absolutely not. It wouldn't have. That's what, and I've always kind of been, I was curious when I first heard the rumblings about the GT convergence. I was like, how is that going to work, really? And at least in IMSA, it's been done the right way, and they did it the way that made the most sense for all parties involved. Now, granted, we still had found an oopsie today, but if they just, what they should do is just treat it all as one class, and then just sort it out at the end of the day, because throughout the season, it really hadn't been an issue before that the GT Pro cars were even worrying about the GTM cars outside of VIR, where the 57 car won. But even then, they're running their own race. Here, you've got to think some of those big teams and those manufacturers aren't going to like the fact that they're going to have to explain to their investors, sponsors, fans, well, why'd you finish behind all those GTM cars? And I think IMSA will fix that. I think it's a pretty easy fix, quite frankly. Looking ahead to the future, there's a big test. Unfortunately, you won't be able to attend it, but we will, with the 2023 LMH car, or LMDH car. I did the thing. Well, let's just call them GTP, because that's what the IMSA marketing people want us to call them, and that's what we're going to call them. We saw at least mock-ups of 4 cars. A couple of them were the real ones, the BMW not so much, but it seems like IMSA is heading in the right direction, and they're not unwilling to change, which is, I think, a huge plus for them, because as much as people like DPI, I feel like even ice cream you get sick of ice cream after you eat it for 10 years. So looking ahead to 2023, what are some key factors you're looking into this? Because you're a historian of the sport, you know the ups and downs of sports car racing. Is this going to be an up, or is this going to be a down?
I think it's certainly going to be an up. You just have to look at where next year's headed already.
We're losing. Yeah, it's
this
cursed.
is what happens.
You said it.
You know what? This is what happens, because Sebring, when we were doing your video, we were using my camera. We're using my camera again here. Your light doesn't like my camera. Is what it is. We're going to continue on, though.
I'm going to be mad at my prejudiced light.
I think next year, we're seeing a big up right now for next season. And what I've made a point of is that when you really think about it, GTP, LMDH, whatever you want to call it, it's really a continuation of DPI.
Yes.
I go as far as saying DPI is not really dead. It's dead in name, but and here's the other thing.
You just can't run the old cars. That's the difference.
Right. Here's the other thing about GTP, though, is that the DPI class was only actually around for 6 seasons.
Yeah.
It was an extremely short run. When you compare it to the DPs that were before it, LMP1 was around for about 2 decades.
Yep.
GTP is really just a continuation of DPI. And what I think it is really, is I think GTP is what DPI was always intended to be.
Yeah.
A truly international formula with, hybrids were going to get factored into DPI at some point, one way or another. It just happens to come now in the form of all new cars with an all new class name.
And the cars from the World Endurance Championship are eligible to race here. Now, we're not expecting any, at least early on in the season, to race. Maybe we'll get lucky and get a Toyota, wild card entry. Hey, maybe here. That would be kind of cool.
Fantastic.
But we're not expecting any wild card entries in 2023. But going into the future, we heard it this weekend, is that Giuseppe Risi is looking at bringing a hypercar here to run in the United States, and that, I think, that is where the real excitement for me is, because I think the one criticism I would truly have about the modern day IMSA versus what I grew up in and really found exciting, in like 2008, 2009, was the fact that at these big events, and I know part of it why they don't want it is that yes, it's cherry picking, but to see the top teams from the world come here and compete against our American teams and American drivers, even not necessarily American drivers, but drivers who race in this system. I think the main criticism of the era that I grew up in loved, was like the 2008, 2009, was that the American teams didn't have an equal chance. And I think we've all been striving and hoping that in sports car racing, you can have the best of both worlds. You can have that international melting pot, but you can also have a fair competition. And that's what I'm so hoping that this, I guess we're still calling it convergence of
right.
hypercar and LMDH will bring, because I think it would absolutely up the whole game in sports car racing.
Right. And here's the other thing. We got a little distraction going on here. The analogy I've been trying to make all week, I'll probably make it in my own video right after this. It's on that channel.
You could have said anything when that went up.
Yeah. I mean, you'd think for a lot of classes, like LMP1, its final race sort of felt like a funeral race. This did not feel like a funeral race. This felt more like a high school graduation party. And all your friends from senior year of high school are going right with you to the same college.
Yeah.
I mean,
and then you're going to meet a new friend.
Yeah, exactly.
A couple new friends.
Yeah, a couple new friends on the track. I think that this convergence we're seeing, even without the visibility of convergence, with no expected hypercars on the grid next season, there goes the light.
There goes that light again.
I still think is a huge up. We're doubling the number of manufacturers we have from this season. We're going to 4 manufacturers again. And realistically, there's more LMDH manufacturers joining in the future. We have Lamborghini, we have Alpine. Still a little bit unsure
whether
whether
will they be allowed
or not.
to race here?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, I guess. We're going to have to wait and see on that one.
Hashtag convergence.
I think
Hashtag let Glick race.
I
said that.
There's plenty of coverage for sports car racing to come, which is I'm excited for. That's my focus.
Yeah. So that's Chris Aurelio, YouTube channel GT Rain. You want sports cars? He's the guy. The rest of the year.
Yeah, you want sports cars every 4 months, I might put a video out.
Well, same. So in 4 months, actually no, that's not true. On Monday, GTP cars. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. That's Chris Aurelio for GT Rain, and we'll see you in the next video.